She was blind, she was black, and she was sitting right next to the most dangerous man in New York, without knowing it. He was bleeding through a $1,000 suit, pressing his hand against a wound that could have ended him right there on that seat, surrounded by ordinary people living ordinary lives, none of them seeing what she felt the moment she sat down. Because Layla, she couldn't see his face. She couldn't see the dragon tattooed up his neck. She couldn't see the fear in the eyes of every person in that city who knew his name. She couldn't see any of it, but she smelled the blood. And without hesitation, without fear, without asking a single question about who he was or what he had done, this young black woman reached into her bag and pressed her hands against the wound of a man whose word alone had ended lives. He looked at her like she was something he had never encountered in 34 years of existing in a world built entirely on what people want from you. Because she wanted nothing. She simply saw a person in pain. And she acted. He told her she was in danger. She told him she was blind, not stupid. He told her his men were coming. She told him to breathe slower, not deeper. There is a difference. And in that moment, something inside the most powerful and most broken man in 3 boroughs cracked open. But what she did 3 weeks later, what she said to him across a bakery counter with $4 between them and years of silence on his side, that is the moment that changed everything. Before starting the story, comment down below where you are watching from and what time it is there. If stories of karma, love, and hidden truths move you, leave a like, be sure to subscribe to the channel, and click Join to become a member and help our channel. There are moments in a city like New York that no one will ever read about in any newspaper. No historian will catalog them, no documentary will reconstruct them with dramatic music and archival footage. And yet, those moments carry inside them the full weight of everything that came before and everything that will come after, hanging there in the stale air of a half-empty city bus on a Thursday afternoon in October, trembling like a thread about to snap. Layla Renee Mitchell, Ray to anyone who had ever earned that privilege, did not know, as she tapped her white cane against the rubber floor of the number 12 bus and felt the familiar vibration travel up through her palm and into her wrist, like a quiet greeting from the city itself, that the man who had just sat down beside her was responsible for decisions that had ended lives. She did not know that the stillness radiating from him like heat from a stone left in the sun was not the stillness of peace, but the stillness of an animal that had learned, over the course of a life lived inside violence, that movement costs and silence saves. She did not know any of this. And in not knowing it, she was the only person on that bus, perhaps the only person in that entire borough, who was capable of responding to him as if he were simply a man. Which, underneath everything, was exactly what he was. Kwon Hyun-jae had been sitting with his left hand pressed flat against his side for 4 minutes and 32 seconds by the time she sat down. He had counted. Counting was something he did automatically now, an old discipline from years when counting was the only thing that kept the panic from reaching the surface where someone might see it. 4 minutes and 32 seconds of controlled breathing, of keeping his back straight against the seat, of letting his eyes move across the windows with the patient, unhurried quality of a man with nowhere particular to be, and nothing in particular on his mind. He was bleeding through the interior lining of a jacket that cost more than most people in this neighborhood earned in 2 months, and he looked like a man waiting for a train that was merely running slightly behind schedule. He had been betrayed 4 hours earlier by someone he had trusted for 7 years. That particular detail had not yet fully arrived inside him. It was sitting at the edge of his thinking the way a very large and very cold body of water sits at the edge of a cliff. Present, measurable, inevitable, but not yet experienced. He would feel it later. He had learned to postpone. What he needed now was distance and containment, and the number 12 bus to Brooklyn was providing both, carrying him away from the building where the meeting had taken place, where his own blood had marked the floor of a room he had considered protected. He had not called his men immediately. That was a choice, and it was a choice that told him more about his current state than he would have liked. Because Kwon Hyun-jae did not make impulsive choices, and yet here he was, bleeding quietly on public transportation, sitting beside a young woman with a burnt orange bag and a tiny bear keychain, and a white cane resting against her knee like it belonged there, which it did, because everything about her seemed to belong exactly where it was, which was a quality he had not encountered in another person in a very long time. She did not shift away from him. That was the first thing he noticed. People always shifted. Some did it immediately, as if proximity to him triggered something prehistoric in the nervous system. Others did it slowly, over the course of a minute, pretending to adjust a bag or look at a phone. But they shifted. Always. He had grown so accustomed to the small geography of human avoidance that he had stopped registering it consciously. It had simply become the background texture of public space, the invisible perimeter that followed him everywhere. She did not shift. She sat with the particular quality of stillness that belongs to people who are paying close attention to something most others cannot detect. Her head tilted very slightly, the way a musician tilts their head when a note they recognize appears inside a piece they have never heard before. And then she said it, quietly, without alarm, without performance. "You are bleeding." And the city moved around them, indifferent and enormous, and Kwon Hyun-jae, who had not been caught off guard by anything in 11 years, did not answer for a full 4 seconds. Because something in those 3 words, in the calm certainty of them, in the complete absence of fear behind them, had reached past every layer he had spent a lifetime constructing and touched something he no longer had a name for. He did not answer, and she did not need him to. That was the thing about Layla Renee Mitchell that most people never understood until they had spent at least 10 minutes in her presence. She did not require confirmation to know what she already knew. 6 years of navigating the world without sight had rebuilt her entirely from the inside out, had rewired the architecture of her attention until she could read the temperature of a room from the quality of its silence, until she could tell the difference between someone who was afraid and someone who was dangerous, until she could feel the particular weight of a secret pressing against the air around the person carrying it. She was not psychic. She was simply paying attention in a world that had trained almost everyone else to stop. She reached into the orange bag, her fingers bypassing the pharmacy receipt, the folded letter from the doctor's office she had not yet decided how to feel about, the lip gloss she had applied on the subway platform that morning, while a child nearby told his mother that the pretty blind lady was putting on makeup, and the mother had shushed him and Ray had smiled, and found the gauze, then the medical tape. Then the small pair of scissors she carried because her grandmother had told her when she was 15 that a woman without scissors in her bag was a woman who trusted the world too much. She held them out in his direction. Not toward his face, toward the space between them. Neutral, unhurried, The way you offer something to a person without making the offering into a demand. He looked at her hands for a long moment. There was something almost unbearable about it. And Hyunjae was a man who had built his entire life around the principle that nothing was unbearable if you refused to let it be. He had sat across tables from men who wanted him dead and eaten the meal they offered without tasting fear. He had made decisions in the space of 4 seconds that he knew would haunt other people for decades, and he had made them cleanly, without the trembling that afflicted lesser men. He was, by any reasonable measure, not someone who should be destabilized by a girl with gauze and a bear keychain on her bag. And yet, there was no angle here. That was what his mind kept returning to, circling it the way it circled every new piece of information, searching for the leverage point, the underlying motivation, the thing that the surface presentation was designed to conceal. There was always an angle. In 34 years of living, 11 of them spent at the center of an organization built on the precise calculation of human motivation, he had never once encountered an act of generosity that did not have a foundation beneath it made of something harder than kindness. But she could not see him. She did not know his face. She did not know the tattoos climbing his neck that made restaurant hosts hesitate before they smiled. She did not know the name that certain people in this city said quietly, indoors, with the particular care you take with a word that has weight. She knew only that the man beside her was bleeding, and that she had gauze, and that the logic connecting those two facts was, to her, apparently sufficient. "My name is Ray," she said, still holding the gauze in that neutral, patient space between them. "And you are going to have to either take this or tell me you don't need it, because my arm is not a shelf." Something moved in his chest. Not emotion, or not what he would have called emotion. Something more structural, like a bolt that had been over-tightened for years, suddenly finding, under an unexpected and very specific pressure, the first fraction of give. He took the gauze. His fingers closed around it slowly, and in doing so, grazed the edge of her hand, and she did not flinch. And he noticed that she did not flinch, and he understood in that instant that her stillness was not ignorance. It was a decision. She had assessed him with senses he had no access to, and she had decided, with full deliberateness, that he was worth helping. No one had made that calculation in his favor in a very long time. "You cannot do it yourself," she said, reading the shift in his breathing the way a sailor reads a change in wind. "You are weak enough that the pressure won't hold. Let me." It was not a question. It was not a command, either. It existed in some third category that he did not have a word for. The kind of statement that leaves a person with only 2 options and makes one of them feel impossible. He opened his jacket. And Layla Renee Mitchell, 20 years old, honey-warm skin and blue teal top and bear keychain swinging gently from the orange bag, pressed her hands with calm and practiced certainty against the wound of the most dangerous man in 3 boroughs. And the city bus moved through Brooklyn as if nothing of any consequence was happening inside it at all. Which was, of course, exactly how the most consequential things always happen. There is a particular kind of silence that forms between 2 people when something irreversible has already begun and neither of them has named it yet. It is not an uncomfortable silence. It is not the silence of people who have nothing to say. It is the silence of people who understand, somewhere beneath language, that whatever words come next will change the shape of things. And so they hold the moment a little longer, the way you hold a breath before diving into water whose depth you cannot see. That was the silence on the number 12 bus as Ray kept steady pressure against Hyunjae's side and the afternoon light came through the windows at the low, amber angle that October reserves for its most melancholy hours, falling across the two of them in a way that, had anyone been watching closely enough, might have looked almost like something painted rather than something lived. No one was watching closely enough. No one ever is. "How bad is it?" she said. Not a question exactly. More like a fact she was inviting him to confirm. "Manageable," he said. That is what people say when it is not manageable and they do not want to admit it. He did not respond to that. Partly because she was correct, and he had not yet developed a protocol for being correct in the presence of someone he had met 4 minutes ago on a city bus. Partly because the pain, which he had been compressing into a small and airless room at the back of his consciousness, was beginning to push against the door with more insistence than it had shown so far. And managing it, and managing a conversation simultaneously, was requiring more of him than he had available. She felt the change in his breathing before he was aware he had made one. "Breathe slower," she said. "Not deeper, slower. There is a difference." He looked at the side of her face, the dark glasses, the small curve at the corner of her mouth that was not quite a smile but was adjacent to one, the expression of someone who finds a situation genuinely interesting rather than frightening, and who is self-aware enough to know the difference between the two. "You have done this before," he said. "My grandmother had a bad heart," she answered. "For 3 years, I was the one home with her when things happened. You learn fast when the alternative is losing someone." She said it without weight, without the particular performance of suffering that people sometimes deploy in conversations to create intimacy quickly. It was simply information, offered cleanly, the way she offered everything, without agenda, without decoration. He filed it away. He filed everything away. It was automatic, the same mechanism that had kept him alive and operational for 11 years. The continuous, unconscious cataloging of detail, the building of a picture from fragments, the understanding that information is always the most valuable currency, and that most people spend it carelessly without realizing they are doing so. But something about the way she spent it made the mechanism feel, for the first time he could remember, slightly beside the point. "You need to call someone," she said. "Not a hospital. I understand that. But someone who knows what they are doing. You have people like that." It was not a question either. She had heard it in the way he spoke, the economy of it, the absence of explanation, the particular quality of a person who is accustomed to being understood without having to fill in the spaces. She had heard that he was not a man who existed in the world the way most people exist in the world. She did not know the specifics. She did not need them. "I have people," he confirmed. "Then use them." He reached into the interior pocket of the jacket with his right hand, moving slowly, and retrieved the phone. Matte black case. No visible brand. She heard the faint sound of it unlocking. Not a numeric code, something biometric. And then the brief silence of a message being composed. And then nothing. "They will meet us at the next stop," he said. "Us?" she repeated. "You have seen me. I am blind Hyunjae." The name in her mouth landed somewhere unexpected. He had given it to her less than 2 minutes ago, and she was already using it with the ease of someone who had known it longer. Not with familiarity that presumed, but with familiarity that simply was. The way certain people move into a space and immediately belong to it without asking permission. "You are not blind in the way that matters right now," he said. "You know what I look like. You know what happened. You know this stop and the one before it. You know enough." She was quiet for a moment. Her hands did not move from his side. "Are you telling me I am in danger?" she said, Or are you telling me you are worried about me?" The question sat between them with the patience of something that intended to be answered. He looked forward, through the windshield of the bus, at the Brooklyn street unreeling ahead of them. The bodegas and the nail salons and the children on bikes and the woman arguing beautifully into a phone on the corner, and all the ordinary furniture of a life being lived in full. And he felt something he had not felt in so long that it took him several seconds to identify it. He felt accountable to someone. Not afraid, not calculating. Accountable. As if whatever happened to this young woman with the orange bag and the bare keychain and the gauze pressed firmly against his wound was something that would matter to him in a way that existed entirely outside the logic of strategy or self-preservation. "Both," he said, finally. And the bus slowed toward the stop, and outside on the pavement, 3 men in dark suits were already waiting. And Layla Renee Mitchell took a slow breath and said nothing for a moment. Because she understood, in the way she understood most things that other people missed entirely, that something had just shifted in the man beside her, something old and load-bearing, and that whatever came next was going to require both of them to be more honest than either of them had planned on being today. The 3 men on the pavement did not move when the bus doors opened. They had been trained, over years of precise and unforgiving instruction, to wait for the signal. A particular tilt of the head, a specific position of the hand, the language of a body that communicated volumes without producing a single audible word. They stood with the particular stillness of people who have learned that stillness is itself a form of power. And they watched the doors, and they waited. What they were not prepared for, what no amount of training in the specific grammar of Kwon Hyun-jae's world had equipped them to process, was the sight of him stepping off a city bus in a blood-stained shirt with a 20-year-old girl in a teal top and a burnt orange bag, her white cane finding the pavement with 2 precise taps, her dark glasses catching the October light, her expression carrying the particular calm of someone who has already decided how she feels about the situation and does not require anyone's input on the matter. The tallest of the 3 men opened his mouth. Hyun-jae raised one hand, 2 inches, without looking at him. The mouth closed. He said something in Korean, 3 sentences, low and unhurried, and the men reorganized themselves without a word, one moving toward the car at the curb, one positioning himself at a distance that was simultaneously unobtrusive and absolute, the third producing a fresh, folded cloth from his jacket and offering it forward. Hyun-jae took it and pressed it against his side to replace the gauze that Ray was still holding. And for a moment, the transfer of pressure between her hands and his own created a brief, wordless negotiation. Her releasing slowly, him taking over with a steadiness that was partly discipline and partly something he did not examine too closely. "You speak Korean," she said. It was not a question. "It is my first language." "It sounds like giving orders." "Most languages sound like giving orders when that is what you are doing." She almost smiled. He noticed it, the way the corner of her mouth moved, and then reconsidered, the way amusement passed across her face like light across water, present, and then reorganized into something more neutral without ever fully disappearing. The car at the curb was black and long and silent in the way that expensive things are silent. Not the absence of sound, but the active suppression of it. The world outside rendered distant and theoretical by money and engineering working together toward the same end. The door was open. The interior exhaled cool, climate-controlled air that smelled faintly of leather and something else, something clean and expensive and vaguely institutional. The smell of a space that was maintained rather than lived in. "I will take you home," he said. She stood on the pavement with her cane and her orange bag, and the bare keychain catching the light, and she did not move immediately toward the car. She stood the way she always stood when she was thinking. Very still, weight distributed evenly, head slightly lifted, as though she was listening to a frequency that required her full and undivided attention to detect. "You do not know where I live," she said. "You will tell me. And if I don't want to tell you, then I will wait." She turned her face toward him at that, not quite looking at him, because looking was not the mechanism she used, but orienting herself toward him with that quality of focused attention that he had not been able to stop thinking about since she first sat down beside him. The quality of being perceived without being seen, which was an entirely different thing, and in some ways considerably more intimate. "You are used to people doing what you say," she said. "Yes. And you think that works on everyone?" "It has, until today." There was a silence. A bus moved past on the street behind them. A child somewhere nearby was laughing at something invisible and completely hilarious, the way only children laugh, with the whole body and no reservation whatsoever. And the sound of it moved through the October air between Hyunjae and Ray like something neither of them had been expecting, and neither of them commented on. "4 stops back," she said finally. "Before I got on. There is a woman on this route, older. She gets on at the stop near the library. She sits in the same seat every time. 3rd row, left side. She was not there today." He looked at her. "I notice when things change," Ray said simply. "Even things people think I cannot notice. Especially those." She let that land. She was not performing it. It was not a demonstration of capability designed to impress him or to establish terms. It was simply true, offered in the same clean, undecorated way she offered everything, as information, as fact, as the honest shape of who she was. And Kwon Hyun-jae, who had spent 11 years constructing a world in which he held every piece of relevant information, and everyone around him held only the pieces he chose to give them, understood in that moment with a clarity that was almost physical that this young woman with the honey-warm skin and the bare keychain had been reading him since the moment she sat down. Not with strategy, not with the cold and purposeful intelligence he used and recognized and knew how to counter, but with something older and more patient than strategy. Something that did not need to win because it was not competing. She was simply paying attention. And he had not been paid that kind of attention. The kind that wanted nothing from him except to understand him accurately, in so long that he could not locate the last time it had happened. He looked for it and found only distance. Years of it, stretching back past the organization and past the first decisions that had built it, and past the night his sister had died in a hospital room while he sat in a car outside making a phone call he had told himself could not wait. And he found nothing. No moment of being seen without being used. Nothing. Until a Thursday in October on the number 12 bus to Brooklyn. "Get in the car, Ray," he said. And his voice was different when he said it. Not softer, exactly, because softness was not a register he had easy access to, but quieter in a way that had nothing to do with volume and everything to do with intention. "Please." She heard the please. She heard what it cost him. She tapped her cane once against the pavement. Twice. And then she moved toward the open door of the car with the ease and certainty of someone who trusts the ground beneath her feet. Not because she can see it, but because she has learned, through years of navigating a world built for people whose experience she does not share, that trust is not the absence of uncertainty. Trust is the decision to move forward anyway. She got in. He stood on the pavement for 2 seconds after she disappeared into the interior of the car, alone in a way he almost never was, surrounded by his men and the Brooklyn street and the low October light. And he felt the full weight of the afternoon arrive inside him all at once. The betrayal, the blood, the pain he had been compressing for hours, all of it. And beneath it, quieter than all of it, something he did not have a protocol for and could not catalog and could not use and could not dismiss. Something that felt, in its early and unfamiliar form, almost like the beginning of wanting to be different than he was. He got in the car. The door closed. The city continued around them, vast and indifferent, and completely unaware that something small and irreversible had just happened inside it. The kind of thing that never makes the news, that no historian will ever reconstruct, that exists only in the specific and private memory of two people who will carry it differently, but carry it always. The car moved into traffic, and Brooklyn went on being Brooklyn, which is to say it went on being loud and alive and entirely unconcerned with the quiet revolutions happening inside the ordinary vehicles moving through its streets. As it always has, as it always will, world without end.
The problem for many women is continuing to call it love when all it has really brought is doubt, emotional exhaustion, and confusion. And the longer that goes on, the harder it becomes to see how much less than they deserve they have been accepting. If you want to start seeing that more clearly and stop repeating that pattern, I left this next step for you. You can access it through the QR code on the screen, the link in the description, or the pinned comment.
If this story moved you, stop for a moment and reflect. Have you ever been in a moment where someone saw your pain clearly, when you were doing everything in your power to hide it, and instead of walking away, they simply stayed? And have you ever underestimated someone because of what they could not do, only to discover that the very thing you thought made them vulnerable was exactly what made them see you more honestly than anyone ever had? Tell us your experiences and feelings in the comments. We read them all. And if you believe in stories about compassion, redemption, and the kind of courage that asks for nothing in return, leave a like, be sure to subscribe to the channel, and click Join to become a part of our community and help the channel.